During my annual review, my wife's dad, the CEO, said, "We are cutting your salary in half. Take it or leave it." I said, "I understand. When does this take effect?" Immediately, he smirked. I nodded and said, "Perfect timing." He had no idea that I'd already been recruited by his biggest competitor. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and instantly know you're about to get screwed? Yeah. Well, welcome to my Tuesday morning. The executive boardroom at Tanner Industries, rye reek of polished oak and that burnt coffee smell that comes from leaving the pot on since 6 a.m. Real classy joint. This place, nothing says we're successful quite like furniture that costs more than most people's cars and coffee that tastes like it was filtered through an old gym sock. My father-in-law, Jim Tanner, CEO extraordinaire and professional pain in my ass, was already planted in his oversized leather throne when I walked in. This chair wasn't just furniture. It was a statement piece. The kind of chair that screams, "I own this place and everyone in it." Which, to be fair, he pretty much did. The man had built Tanner Industries from the ground up, turning a small logistics company into a regional powerhouse that moved everything from auto parts to industrial equipment. Respect where it's due, the guy knew how to run a business. Too bad, he was also a manipulative bastard who treated family dinners like hostile takeovers. Jim didn't even look up from his paperwork when I took my seat across from him. Classic power move. Make the other guy wait while you shuffle through documents that probably say nothing more important than remember to pick up dry cleaning. I've been on the receiving end of this particular theater performance enough times to know the script. First the uncomfortable silence, then the dramatic eye contact. Finally, the verbal gut punch delivered with all the warmth of a tax audit. "Marcus," he said, finally gracing me with his attention. His voice had that flat, emotionless quality that rich guys perfect when they're about to ruin someone's day. "Let's get straight to business." "Oh, here we go." I leaned back in my chair, mirroring his casual posture. After 15 years of dealing with Jim Tanner's corporate theater, I'd learned to play along. "Sure thing, Jim. What's on your mind?" He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Never did. Jim was the kind of guy who probably charged his own mother for Christmas dinner. "We're cutting your salary in half, Marcus," he announced like he was discussing the weather. "Take it or leave it." And there it was. The moment I'd been half expecting for months, delivered with all the ceremony of ordering a sandwich. 15 years of loyalty, late nights, missed family dinners, weekend calls, holiday emergencies, all of it brushed aside like lint on an expensive suit. 15 years of making this company millions while he took the credit and I took the blame when things went sideways. I kept my face neutral, a skill I perfected during countless family gatherings where Jim's idea of small talk involved reminding everyone how generous he was for letting me marry his daughter. "I understand," I replied, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. Inside I was doing cartwheels. This arrogant son of A had just handed me the best gift of my professional life, and he didn't even know it. Jim's smirk spread across his face like oil on water. He thought he'd crushed me. Thought he'd finally put the outsider in his place. The man practically glowed with satisfaction, probably already planning how he'd tell this story at the country club. "Poor Marcus couldn't handle the pressure," he'd say. "Had to cut his salary just to keep him around." The other old boys would nod and agree that family businesses were tough, that sometimes you had to make hard choices. "It takes effect immediately," he continued, clearly savoring every word. The immediacy wasn't about cash flow or budget constraints. Tanner Industries was pulling in more money than ever. This was about power, about reminding me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. Spoiler alert, it wasn't at the top. I nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Perfect timing," I said. Those two words hung in the air between us like smoke from a cigarette. Jim's smirk faltered for just a second, not long enough for anyone else to notice, but I caught it. He didn't know what I meant. And that little flicker of uncertainty was delicious. See, Jim Tanner might have been a business genius, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. For months, I'd been watching the cracks in his empire. Suppliers getting restless over delayed payments. Key clients grumbling about service issues, employees jumping ship to competitors. Jim was so busy playing king of the mountain that he'd stopped paying attention to the avalanche building beneath his feet. And me, I've been taking notes. The thing about being the family outsider is that you learn to see things differently. While the Tanner boys, Claire's brothers Brendan and Oliver, were busy kissing daddy's ring and playing office politics, I was actually working, building relationships with suppliers, solving client problems, keeping the wheels turning. Jim took credit for my wins, and blamed me for every setback, but the people doing the real work. They knew who was actually running the show. "Is there anything else you'd like to discuss?" I asked, standing up from my chair with the kind of calm confidence that probably made him wonder if I'd suffered a concussion on the way to his office. Jim waved a dismissive hand. "That's all, Marcus. I'm sure you understand the position the company is in." The position the company was in, right? The company that had just posted record quarterly profits was apparently so strapped for cash that they needed to slash my salary. Makes perfect sense when you don't think about it at all. I walked toward the door, then paused with my hand on the brass handle. "Jim," I said, turning back to face him. "I want you to know that I really do appreciate everything you've done for me." His chest puffed up like a peacock's. The man lived for moments like this when the help showed proper gratitude. "Well, Marcus, I've always tried to take care of family." Family. The word tasted like cheap wine and broken promises. I was family when he needed someone to clean up a client crisis at 2 a.m. on a Sunday. I was family when quarterly numbers needed massaging. But when it came time for credit or respect or basic human decency, suddenly I was just the guy who married his daughter. "Absolutely." I agreed. "You've really opened my eyes to a lot of things." Jim nodded sagely, completely missing the double meaning for a smart businessman. The guy had a remarkable blind spot when it came to reading people. Maybe it came from 30 years of surrounding himself with these men and family members who depended on his approval for their livelihoods. As I walked out of his office, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd been avoiding for weeks. Lydia Wilkes, COO of Wilkes Global, Tanner Industries' biggest competitor and biggest pain in Jim's ass. She'd been trying to poach me for months, making offers that would have made Jim's head spin. Up until today, I'd been playing the loyal soldier, the grateful son-in-law, the team player. But you know what they say about the best-laid plans of mice and megalomaniacal father-in-laws. Sometimes they blow up in your face in the most spectacular way possible. I typed out a quick message. "Lydia, let's talk. That offer's still on the table." Her response came back in less than 30 seconds. "Always. When can you start?" I looked back at Jim's office door, imagining him in there, probably already planning his next power play, secure in the knowledge that he'd put me in my place. Poor bastard had no idea that he'd just lit the fuse on his own empire. "How about we discuss details over lunch?" I typed back, "I've got some interesting insights about market opportunities you might find useful." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "Finally, I like where this is going. Noon at the Marriott downtown." "Perfect," I replied. "See you there." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and headed toward my office. Correction, my soon-to-be former office with a spring in my step that hadn't been there in months. Jim Tanner thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. What he didn't realize was that I'd been playing an entirely different game all along. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I caught my reflection in the polished steel. For the first time in years, the guy staring back looked like someone who was about to win. Jim wanted to cut my salary in half. Fine. I was about to cut him out of the picture entirely. Game on, old man. Game on. Let me paint you a picture of my so-called perfect life before you start feeling too sorry for poor old Marcus getting his salary chopped in half on paper. And trust me, Jim loved putting things on paper so he could frame them and hang them on his ego wall. I had it all. Executive Vice President of Operations, corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown company BMW that still had that new leather smell and a salary that made my college buddies green with envy every time we grabbed beers. Oh, and I was married to Claire Tanner, the princess of the industrial supply kingdom. Blonde, beautiful, and born with a platinum spoon so far up her ass that she could taste the family crest. To everyone on the outside looking in, I was living the American dream with a capital D and a side of how the hell did that guy get so lucky. Here's the thing about golden cages, though they're still cages. And after 15 years of being the dancing monkey in Jim Tanner's three-ring circus, the gilding had worn pretty damn thin. Every single success I'd managed to pull off got twisted into some brilliant example of Jim's mentorship and guidance. Remember that Patterson Industries deal that saved our asses during the 2019 slowdown? The one where I spent 3 months smoozing their purchasing director and basically lived in hotel conference rooms hammering out terms. Yeah, according to the company newsletter, that was all thanks to CEO Jim Tanner's strategic vision and leadership excellence. My name appeared in the fine print, if at all, usually somewhere between special thanks to the janitorial staff and don't forget to validate your parking. But every failure, every client who walked away, every supplier who got pissy about payment terms, every time a delivery truck broke down in the middle of nowhere, that was all Marcus Sullivan, folks. Front page news, complete with a detailed analysis of my learning opportunities and areas for professional growth. Jim had turned blame shifting into an art form, and I was his favorite canvas. The worst part wasn't even Jim himself. Although the man could give lessons on how to be a condescending prick to middle managers everywhere. No, the real knife in the back came from Claire's brothers, Brendan and Oliver. These two walking trust fund disasters looked at me like I was some kind of charity case who'd somehow conned his way into their exclusive club. Brendan, the older one, had all the business acumen of a decorative house plant, but somehow held the title of Senior Vice President of Development. His idea of strategic planning involved expensive lunches and golf tournaments, where he'd promise clients things that were physically impossible to deliver. Then, guess who got to clean up the mess when reality came knocking? That's right, good old Marcus, the family problem solver. Oliver wasn't much better. Junior VP of Finance with a Harvard MBA that his daddy's donations had basically purchased for him. The kid could barely balance his own checkbook, but he sure could lecture me about fiscal responsibility and knowing my place in the organizational structure. Real rich coming from someone whose biggest professional achievement was not accidentally setting the office printer on fire. Family dinners were like psychological warfare disguised as pot roast and small talk. Picture this. Every Sunday at the Tanner estate, a sprawling monument to new money that looked like someone had thrown a colonial mansion and a McMansion into a blender. Jim would hold court at the head of a dining table that could have doubled as a landing strip, dispensing wisdom and passive-aggressive commentary like some kind of industrial supply godfather. Marcus, he'd say, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. You're so lucky to be part of this family. Not everyone gets opportunities like this. Lucky that word followed me around like a bad smell. Lucky to work 70-hour weeks. Lucky to take the heat when his golden boy screwed up. Lucky to sit at the kids' table of a business I'd helped build while Brendan and Oliver got to play with the grown-ups. Claire would just sit there sipping her wine and nodding along like one of those dashboard bobbleheads. Dad's right, honey. We're all so fortunate. Fortunate. Another favorite family buzzword. We were fortunate to have Jim's leadership. Fortunate to be part of his vision. Fortunate to shut up and do what we were told without asking inconvenient questions about things like respect or basic human decency. But the real kicker was how they talked about the business itself. According to the official Tanner family mythology, this was a dynasty built on hard work, family values, and good old-fashioned American ingenuity. The reality, Jim had inherited a decent-sized trucking company from his own father-in-law and spent 30 years leveraging other people's money and labor to turn it into something bigger. Not exactly the rags to riches story he loved telling at industry conferences. Behind the scenes, Tanner Industries was held together with duct tape, crossed fingers, and my personal willingness to work miracles on a regular basis. While Jim played golf with potential investors and the boys practiced their executive cosplay, I was the one actually keeping the trains running on time. Literally, we had a major rail contract that required precision timing. And guess who spent his weekends coordinating with freight schedulers? The funny thing about being treated like an outsider in your own family business is that it gives you a unique perspective on all the cracks in the foundation. While everyone else was busy playing their assigned roles in the Tanner family drama, I was watching the real show. Suppliers getting nervous about payment schedules, key employees updating their LinkedIn profiles, competitors circling like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. Jim's empire looked solid from the outside. Sure, shiny offices, fancy company vehicles, quarterly reports that made investors happy, but I could see the rot underneath. Outdated systems that hadn't been upgraded since the Clinton administration, a management structure that prioritized family loyalty over actual competence, client relationships held together by my personal reputation, and about 15 years worth of favors that I'd called in to clean up other people's messes. And through it all, I played my part. Loyal son-in-law, dedicated employee, team player who never rocked the boat or asked for more than he deserved. I smiled at Jim's jokes, laughed along when Brendan told stories about his latest business school buddy's startup failure, and pretended not to notice when Oliver accidentally forgot to invite me to strategy meetings. But here's what none of them understood about Marcus Sullivan. I wasn't just some lucky bastard who'd married above his station. I was a guy who'd built his own reputation in this industry, one satisfied client, and one successful project at a time. The relationships I'd developed, the trust I'd earned, the expertise I'd gained, none of that belonged to Jim Tanner or his precious family business, that was all mine. So when Jim delivered his little salary ultimatum with that smug expression he reserved for special occasions, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. He thought he was cutting me down to size, putting me in my place, reminding me who held the real power in this relationship. What he'd actually done was hand me the perfect excuse to stop pretending I gave a damn about his approval. The man wanted to play hardball. Fine by me. I'd been warming up in the bullpen for 15 years, just waiting for my turn at bat. And Jim Tanner was about to learn the hard way that sometimes the guy you've been treating like hired help might just be the one person standing between your empire and total collapse. Perfect timing indeed. The only question now was whether I wanted to watch his world burn slowly or just pour gasoline on the whole thing and enjoy the fireworks. Decisions. So, here's the thing about timing. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor that would make a stand-up comedian jealous. 3 weeks before Jim decided to play salary limbo with my paycheck. I was sitting in my office on a perfectly ordinary Thursday afternoon, minding my own business and trying to figure out why our Springfield warehouse kept losing inventory like it was going out of style. That's when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Now, in my line of work, unknown numbers usually meant one of three things. A client with a crisis that needed fixing yesterday. A supplier calling to complain about something that wasn't my fault, or some poor telemarketer who was about to get an earful about interrupting my lunch break. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. Call it instinct, call it boredom, call it whatever you want. Turns out it was the best decision I'd made in years. Marcus Sullivan, I answered using my professional voice that suggested I was important enough to be busy but polite enough to take your call. Mr. Sullivan, this is Lydia Wills from Wilks Global. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Holy Lydia Wilks. The Lydia Wilks. If Jim Tanner was the king of regional industrial supply, then Lydia was the queen who'd been steadily expanding her territory and making his life miserable for the past 5 years. Wilks Global had started as a West Coast operation, but had been aggressively moving east, snatching up clients and contracts like they were Pokemon cards. Jim mentioned her name at board meetings the way normal people talked about root canals, with obvious pain and a desperate desire for the whole thing to be over. I've got time, I said, suddenly a lot more interested in this conversation than my missing inventory reports. Her voice was smooth, professional, with just a hint of that California confidence that comes from building an empire in one of the most competitive markets in the country. I'll cut right to the chase, Mr. Sullivan. We've been watching your work at Tanner Industries for quite some time. Your reputation in this industry speaks for itself. My reputation, not Jim's reputation, not the Tanner family legacy, my reputation. When was the last time someone at Tanner Industries had acknowledged that I might actually be good at my job? I'd been there so long that I'd started to wonder if my professional identity had completely merged with Jim's son-in-law, who does things. That's very flattering, I replied, leaning back in my chair. What exactly can I do for you, Miss Wilks? Call me Lydia. And actually, it's more about what we can do for you. I'm calling because Wilks Global is planning a major expansion into the Midwest market. And we want someone with your experience and connections to lead the initiative. Lead the initiative, not assist with or support or help implement. Lead, as in be the guy making the actual decisions instead of the guy explaining why someone else's bad decisions weren't working out. The concept was so foreign after 15 years at Tanner Industries that I almost didn't know how to process it. That's interesting, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral while my brain started doing backflips. What would something like that look like? Lydia laughed. And it wasn't one of those fake corporate laughs that sound like someone practicing scales on a broken piano. This was genuine amusement, like she could hear the carefully controlled excitement in my voice. Well, for starters, it would look like you having actual authority over your own projects. Revolutionary concept, I know. Full control over budget allocation, hiring decisions, strategic partnerships, the works. Full control. I'd forgotten what those words even meant. At Tanner Industries, my idea of full control was being allowed to choose which brand of coffee to order for the break room. And even that required approval from the purchasing committee that Jim's nephew ran like his own personal thief. We're not looking for an employee, Marcus. Lydia continued, we want a partner, someone who can build something from the ground up and has the experience to make it profitable from day one. The compensation package would reflect that level of responsibility. Compensation package. She hadn't thrown out numbers yet, but something in her tone suggested we weren't talking about the kind of salary that gets cut in half during annual reviews. We were talking about the kind of money that comes with equity stakes and performance bonuses and all those other executive perks that Jim kept for family members only. And what makes you think I'd be interested in leaving my current position? I asked, partly because I was curious about her sales pitch and partly because I wanted to see how much she actually knew about my situation at Tanner Industries. There was a pause just long enough for me to wonder if I'd overplayed my hand. Then Lydia spoke again and her voice had shifted slightly. Less corporate smoothness, more straight talk. Marcus, I've been in this industry for 20 years. I know talent when I see it, and I also know when that talent is being wasted. From where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been doing the heavy lifting while other people take the credit. That gets old, doesn't it? Damn. Either this woman was psychic or my professional frustration was more obvious than I'd thought. Probably the latter. After 15 years of grinding my teeth through family meetings where my contributions got brushed aside, like yesterday's newspaper, I probably developed some kind of visible twitch. I'm just saying, she continued, that we've built Wilks Global by recognizing talent and giving it room to grow. We don't care about family trees or who went to which prep school. We care about results, and your results speak for themselves. Results, another word that had gotten lost in translation at Tanner Industries, where results apparently mattered less than maintaining the proper chain of command and making sure nobody forgot who signed the paychecks. This is a very interesting conversation, Lydia. I said, which was corporate speak for, holy crap, you're offering me everything I've wanted for the past decade. But I hope you understand that I need to think about something like this very carefully. Of course, I wouldn't expect anything less from someone with your professional standards. But Marcus, her voice took on a slightly sharper edge. Don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't stay open forever. And frankly, we're not the only ones who've noticed your work. The industry is smaller than most people realize. That last part hit me like a splash of cold water. She was right. The industrial supply world was basically a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. If Lydia had noticed my situation at Tanner Industries, others probably had too. And if word got around that I was having conversations with competitors, Jim would lose his mind in the most spectacular way possible. I appreciate the call, Lydia, and the confidence you're showing in my abilities. Can I ask how long I'd have to consider this? Take your time, she said, but her tone suggested that take your time had some practical limitations. I'll be honest with you, we're looking to move on this expansion within the next few months. The market conditions are perfect right now, and we don't want to miss our window. But the right person is worth waiting for. And you're the right person. The right person, not the lucky guy who married into the family business. Not the outsider who should be grateful for whatever scraps fell off the table. The right person for the job based on actual qualifications and track record. Novel concept. I understand completely, I replied. And I want you to know that I'm genuinely interested in hearing more details. This isn't just a polite brush off. Good, Lydia said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Because I hate polite brush offs almost as much as I hate wasted potential. I'll email you some preliminary information about the expansion plans. Nothing proprietary, just enough to give you a sense of the scope we're talking about. Fair enough. More than fair. I'll keep an eye out for it. Excellent. And Marcus, I know this might feel like a big decision, but sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all. You've spent 15 years proving what you can do within someone else's system. Imagine what you could accomplish when you're actually running the show. Running the show, the phrase echoed in my head long after we'd hung up. I'd been so focused on climbing the ladder at Tanner Industries that I'd almost forgotten there were other ladders out there, ones that didn't require me to kiss the ring of a megalomaniacal father-in-law who treated me like a glorified intern with a fancy title. I spent the rest of that afternoon staring out my corner office window, watching traffic crawl through downtown like ants carrying crumbs back to the colony. Funny how perspective changes everything. From up here, all those people looked like they were part of some grand plan. Everyone knowing their role and playing their part, but I'd bet good money that most of them felt just as trapped in their daily grind as I did in my golden cage. The email from Lydia arrived exactly 43 minutes later. And let me tell you, the woman wasn't kidding about the scope of their expansion plans. We're talking about a full-scale invasion of Jim's territory, complete with distribution centers, client acquisition strategies, and enough startup capital to make my current operating budget look like lunch money. They weren't just planning to compete with Tanner Industries. They were planning to obliterate us. And they wanted me to be the guy holding the demolition charges. That night at dinner, Claire asked me why I seemed distracted. I told her it was just work stuff, nothing important. She nodded and went back to scrolling through Instagram, probably looking at pictures of other executives' wives living their best lives on company yachts and private jets. If only she knew that her husband had just been offered a chance to become one of those executives instead of just pretending to be one. But then again, Claire had never been particularly interested in the details of my professional life unless it affected her shopping budget or social calendar. 3 weeks later, when Jim delivered his salary ultimatum with all the subtlety of a brick through a window, I couldn't help but think about Lydia's words. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all. Turns out she was right about something else, too. Perfect timing really is everything. You want to know when a marriage is really over? It's not during the screaming fights or the dramatic door-slamming exits you see in movies. Nope. It's during those quiet moments when your spouse looks right through you like you're a piece of furniture that needs dusting. That's exactly what happened the night I came home to tell Claire about her daddy's little salary surprise. I walked into our McMansion and yeah, I'm calling it a McMansion because that's exactly what it was. Despite Claire's insistence on calling it our family estate, expecting at least some basic human sympathy. Maybe that sucks, honey. Or what the hell is Dad thinking? Hell, I would have settled for eye contact and a grunt of acknowledgement. What I got instead was Claire curled up on our oversized sectional sofa with a glass of Chardonnay that probably cost more than most people's car payments, scrolling through her phone like I was an Uber driver who just told her about traffic delays. "Hey babe," I said, loosening my tie and trying to sound casual. "How was your day?" "Fine," she mumbled without looking up. Her attention was completely absorbed by whatever was happening on her Instagram feed. Probably checking out photos from her college roommate's latest vacation to the Hamptons or some influencer's sponsored post about skincare routines. You know, the really important stuff that requires laser focus. I poured myself a bourbon, the good stuff that Jim had given me for Christmas, probably so he could remind me later how generous he was, and sat down next to her. "So, I had an interesting meeting with your dad today." That got about half a second of eye contact before she went back to her phone. "Oh, yeah. How's work going?" "How's work going?" Like I was some middle manager she'd met at a cocktail party instead of her husband of 12 years. "Well, funny you should ask. Your father decided to cut my salary in half." I expected shock, outrage, maybe even some choice words about her father's management style. What I got was Claire taking a sip of wine and shrugging like I just told her the mailman was running late. "Dad knows best," she said, still not bothering to look at me. "He's been running the company since before either of us was born. If he thinks this is necessary, then you'll adjust. You'll adjust. Not, we'll figure this out together. Or, that seems unfair. Or even, wow, that sucks." Just a casual dismissal wrapped up in blind family loyalty. Like I was some kind of financial inconvenience that could be solved with a little belt tightening and positive thinking. "Claire," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "We're talking about a 50% pay cut here. That's not exactly adjusting the thermostat. That's restructuring our entire lifestyle." She finally looked up from her phone and for a hot second, I thought maybe we were going to have an actual conversation. Instead, she gave me that patronizing smile she'd perfected at charity luncheons. "Marcus, you're being dramatic. Dad wouldn't do anything that wasn't in the best interest of the company. And what's good for the company is good for our family. What's good for the company is good for our family." Jesus Christ, she sounded like a corporate press release with better hair. I married Claire Tanner thinking I was getting a partner, someone who'd have my back when things got tough. What I'd actually gotten was Jim's press secretary with benefits. Besides, she continued, settling back into her phone scrolling position, "It's not like we're going to be living on food stamps. You still make more than most people." Most people. There it was. The classic rich person's perspective that completely missed the point. Sure, even with the pay cut, I'd still be making decent money. But that wasn't what this was about. And the fact that she couldn't see that told me everything I needed to know about where her priorities lay. I went upstairs to change out of my work clothes, and that's when I made the mistake of checking my phone. There was a notification from a group chat that I wasn't supposed to be part of. One of those family threads that Claire's brothers use to coordinate their weekend plans and share inside jokes. Somehow, I'd gotten added to it months ago, probably by accident, and nobody had bothered to remove me. Usually, I ignored it because listening to Brendan and Oliver plan their golf outings was about as exciting as watching paint dry in slow motion. But tonight's conversation was different. Tonight, they were talking about me. "Brendan, did you guys hear about Marcus getting his salary cut?" Faced with tears of joy, Oliver. "Dad finally put him in his place. About time someone reminded Charity Case Marcus where he stands in the family hierarchy." "Brendan think he'll quit?" Crossed fingers. Oliver, "Doubt it. Where else is he going to make that kind of money? Dad's got him by the balls and he knows it." Brendan, "True. Plus, Claire would never leave the family. Marcus is stuck whether he likes it or not. Charity Case Marcus, that's what they call me behind my back. 15 years of working my ass off. 15 years of making their family business more profitable. 15 years of showing up and doing the job. And to them, I was still just the charity case who'd gotten lucky enough to marry their sister." I sat on the edge of our king-sized bed, staring at that group chat until the words started blurring together. The worst part wasn't even the insults. I'd suspected for years that this was how they really felt about me. The worst part was the casual assumption that I was trapped, that I had nowhere else to go, that I'd just sit there and take whatever they dished out because I needed them more than they needed me. Claire walked into the bedroom about an hour later, fresh from what I assumed was her nightly routine of liking Instagram posts and texting her book club friends about whatever they pretend to read this month. She glanced at me sitting there with my phone in my hands and must have noticed something in my expression. "What's wrong now?" she asked, and I swear to God. She made it sound like I was a car that kept making weird noises despite multiple trips to the mechanic. I showed her the group chat. Your brothers have some interesting thoughts about your husband. She read it over and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something like embarrassment flash across her face, but then she handed my phone back and shrugged. They're just blowing off steam. Marcus, you know how boys are. Boys? These weren't boys. They were grown men in their 30s who held executive positions at a major company. But in Claire's world, apparently casual cruelty was just boys being boys. And I was supposed to laugh it off like some good-natured hazing ritual. Claire, they call me a charity case. Your own brothers think your husband is basically a leech who married into money. She sat down at her vanity and started her nighttime skincare routine, addressing my reflection in the mirror instead of actually looking at me. Marcus, you're being too sensitive. Family teases each other. It doesn't mean anything. Family teases each other, right? Because nothing says loving family banter quite like calling someone a charity case and betting on whether they'll have the dignity to quit their job. Besides, she added, smoothing some kind of anti-aging cream under her eyes. You did marry into this family. That's not exactly a secret. And Dad has been incredibly generous with you over the years. Maybe instead of getting upset about silly text messages, you should focus on showing him that you deserve his continued support. Deserve his continued support. Like I was some kind of dependent relative instead of the guy who'd been keeping his business running smoothly while his sons played office and learned important executive skills like expense account management and recreational golf. I realized something sitting there, watching my wife defend her family's casual cruelty while she applied $70 face cream that was supposed to fight the aging process. Claire had never really seen me as her partner. I was an accessory to her lifestyle, a reasonably successful husband who looked good at company parties and didn't embarrass her at charity functions. The fact that I had feelings, ambitions, or professional pride of my own was basically irrelevant to the role I was supposed to play. When I didn't respond immediately, she turned around in her chair and gave me that look. The one that suggested I was being unreasonably difficult about something perfectly obvious. Marcus, you're part of this family now. That means supporting Dad's decisions, even when they're hard to understand. He's built everything we have. Everything we have, not everything I'd helped build or contributed to. Everything he'd built that we were lucky enough to benefit from. In Claire's mind, I was still just the guy who'd won the lottery by marrying the boss's daughter. That night, lying in bed next to a woman who basically told me to shut up and be grateful for the scraps. I kept thinking about Lydia's words. We don't want an employee. We want a partner. Claire never asked how I felt about the salary cut. Never wondered if maybe her father was being unreasonable. Never considered that 15 years of loyalty and hard work might deserve more respect than a casual dismissal and a reminder to know my place. But you know what? That was fine because while she was busy being Daddy's little girl, I was starting to remember what it felt like to be Marcus Sullivan, the guy who'd built his own reputation in this industry long before he'd ever heard the name Tanner. And that guy was about to make some very interesting decisions. You know what they say about the best revenge? It's a dish best served cold with a side of meticulous planning and a garnish of holy I can't believe that just happened. Over the next week, I became the poster child for professional composure. I showed up to work every morning with a smile, attended Jim's painfully boring board meetings without complaint, and even laughed at Brendan's terrible jokes about quarterly projections. To anyone watching, I was the model employee gracefully accepting his reduced circumstances. What they couldn't see was the spreadsheet I was building at home every night. My own personal exit strategy disguised as a simple contact list. Names, phone numbers, email addresses, contract dates, personal details about kids and spouses, and vacation plans. 15 years of relationship building doesn't just disappear because your father-in-law decides to play power games with your paycheck. Take Danny Morrison for example, head of procurement at Morrison Logistics, one of our biggest clients. Most people saw Danny as just another suit with a purchase order, but I knew he was a divorced dad of twin girls who coached Little League on weekends and had been looking for a more reliable supplier ever since his ex-wife moved to Phoenix with the kids. We'd grab lunch every couple months and he'd always end up talking about how Tanner Industries was solid but sometimes slow to adapt to changing market conditions. Marcus, he'd said during our last lunch, picking at his club sandwich like he was defusing a bomb. You guys do good work, don't get me wrong, but sometimes I feel like I'm dealing with a company that's stuck in 1995. Everything takes 3 approval levels and a committee meeting just to change the color of the delivery truck. At the time, I'd made some diplomatic noises about corporate efficiency and process improvement. But now I was thinking about how Denis might react if someone offered him the same quality service with half the bureaucratic and maybe a 10% discount for switching vendors. Hypothetically speaking, of course. Then there was Sandra Chun, our operations manager, who'd been with the company for 8 years and knew our delivery systems better than Jim knew his own golf handicap. Sandra was sharp, efficient, and completely wasted at Tanner Industries, where her suggestions for process improvements usually got buried under layers of "that's not how we've always done things, and let's table this for the next quarterly review." I made it a point to grab coffee with Sandra that Wednesday, just two colleagues catching up on warehouse efficiency metrics and staffing schedules. "Nothing suspicious about that, right? You know what's crazy, Marcus?" she said, stirring sugar into her coffee with the kind of precision that made her so good at logistics coordination. "I've been thinking about updating our entire inventory tracking system. We could cut delivery times by 20% and reduce overhead costs by streamlining the distribution network, but every time I bring it up, Jim wants 3 different feasibility studies and a cost-benefit analysis that takes 6 months to complete." "That does sound frustrating," I replied, mentally adding Sandra's name to my growing list of people who might be interested in working for an organization that actually valued innovation over tradition. "It is frustrating," she continued. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to work somewhere that actually wanted to improve instead of just maintaining the status quo. You know what I mean?" "Oh, Sandra, if only you knew how much I understood exactly what you meant." By Friday, I had what you might call a comprehensive overview of Tanner Industries' most valuable assets. And I'm not talking about the warehouses or the truck fleet. I'm talking about the people who actually made things work, the clients who generated revenue, and the suppliers who kept our operations running smoothly. Funny how when you start paying attention to who really drives the business, you realize how much of it has nothing to do with family names or corner offices. My phone had been buzzing with messages from Lydia all week. Nothing pushy, just professional follow-ups and additional details about Wilks Global's expansion timeline. She was smart enough to know that rushing a guy making this kind of decision was a good way to spook him into staying put, but she was also smart enough to keep the conversation going to make sure I didn't forget about the opportunity while I was busy playing loyal employee. Thursday night, she sent me a text that wasn't quite business and wasn't quite personal. "Hope you're having a good week. No pressure on our previous conversation, but I thought you might find this interesting." Attached was a link to an industry article about companies that had successfully expanded into new markets by hiring executives with established regional connections. The article was basically a case study in everything I'd been thinking about. Companies that trusted experienced hires to build new divisions. Executives who'd taken calculated risks and been rewarded with equity stakes and real authority. Success stories that started with someone deciding they were worth more than whatever scraps their current employer was throwing their way. I forwarded the article to my personal email and saved it in a folder I'd labeled Professional Development. Claire never checked my computer anyway. She was too busy managing her own social calendar and planning charity committee meetings where rich wives got together to feel good about donating other people's money to causes they'd never actually volunteer for themselves. The real breakthrough came Friday afternoon during what was supposed to be a routine staff meeting. Jim was holding court at the head of the conference table, explaining his vision for the next quarter like he was revealing the cure for cancer. Brendan and Oliver flanked him like matching book hints, nodding enthusiastically at every pronouncement. The rest of us, the people who actually did the work, sat there taking notes and trying to look interested. "Our competitive advantage," Jim declared, gesturing at a PowerPoint slide that looked like it had been designed by a particularly unimaginative intern, "lies in our established relationships and time-tested processes. While other companies chase after every new trend, we stick with what works. Established relationships, time-tested processes, corporate speak for we're too lazy and set in our ways to adapt to changing market conditions." I glanced around the table at faces that ranged from politely attentive to barely concealed boredom. These people knew the score. They've been hearing variations of this same speech for years while watching competitors eat our lunch with better technology and more flexible service options. After the meeting, I lingered in the conference room pretending to review my notes while everyone else filed out. That's when I overheard Brendan talking to Oliver by the elevator. "Dad's really putting the screws to Marcus," Brendan was saying, and he sounded way too pleased about it. "Think it'll finally get him to quit?" "Nah," Oliver replied. "Guy's got nowhere else to go. Dad's been carrying him for years. Without the Tanner name backing him up, he's just another middle-aged operations guy with a decent resume. Just another middle-aged operations guy." That's how they saw me. Interchangeable, disposable, completely dependent on their family's generosity for my professional survival. The fact that I'd been the one actually building and maintaining most of those established relationships Jim loved bragging about was apparently irrelevant. That night, I sat in my home office and opened up a fresh document on my computer. Not a resignation letter. I wasn't quite ready for that level of drama. Instead, I started writing what you might call a professional inventory. Every client relationship I developed personally. Every supplier who trusted me more than they trusted the Tanner Industries corporate structure. Every employee who'd come to me with problems because they knew I'd actually listen instead of referring them to HR for a consultation about proper channels. The list was longer than I'd expected. 15 years of showing up and doing the job had created a network that belonged to me, not to Jim's company. These weren't just business contacts. They were people who'd worked with Marcus Sullivan, not just some guy who happened to work for Tanner Industries. I also started a second list. Internal processes and systems that I developed or improved over the years. Inventory management protocols that had saved the company hundreds of thousands in waste. Client communication systems that had reduced complaint calls by 60%. Staff scheduling innovations that had boosted productivity while keeping overtime costs under control. None of these improvements had Jim's name on them. None of them required the Tanner family seal of approval to work effectively. They were solutions I'd created, tested, and implemented because I'd identified problems and figured out ways to fix them. In other words, they were portable. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with another message from Lydia. I know you're still considering our conversation, but I wanted you to know that the timeline for this expansion is firming up. We're looking at a January launch, which means we need our leadership team in place by December. Just wanted to keep you in the loop. January launch, December deadline. That gave me about 8 weeks to make a decision that would completely reshape my professional life. 8 weeks to figure out whether I wanted to spend the next 15 years watching Jim and his sons run their company into the ground while I played the role of grateful family retainer, or whether I was ready to bet on myself for once. I typed back, "Thanks for the update. I appreciate you keeping me informed about the timeline. This is definitely something I'm taking seriously." Her response came back within minutes. "Good, because seriously, Marcus, you're exactly what we need for this expansion. We're not just offering you a job. We're offering you a chance to build something. Build something, not maintain something that someone else had built, not protect something from changing market conditions. Build something new from the ground up with my own vision and strategy." I closed my laptop and headed back to bed, where Claire was already asleep. Probably dreaming about whatever rich wives dream about. Designer handbags maybe, or charity galas where she could wear expensive dresses and tell people about her husband's important job at daddy's company. Tomorrow I go back to playing my role. Loyal employee, grateful son-in-law, team player who knew his place in the family hierarchy. But tonight, for the first time in years, I was planning my own future instead of just accepting whatever Jim Tanner decided it should be. And it felt pretty damn good. Leading a double life is way more exhausting than Hollywood makes it look. Trust me on this one. For the past month, I'd been Marcus Sullivan, beautiful Tanner Industries employee by day, and Marcus Sullivan, secret weapon of Wilks Global expansion by night. It was like being a corporate superhero, except instead of fighting crime, I was plotting the systematic dismantling of my father-in-law's business empire. Not exactly the origin story you see in comic books, but hey, we all have our calling. My official cover story was Bulletproof, Special Projects, 2 words that could mean absolutely anything and nothing at the same time. When Jim asked what I was working on, I'd throw around terms like operational efficiency analysis and long-term strategic assessment, corporate buzzword bingo at its finest. The beautiful thing about special projects is that they're supposed to be confidential, which meant I could disappear for hours at a time without anyone asking too many questions. What I was actually doing was spending quality time at Wilks Global headquarters, a sleek glass tower downtown that made Tanner Industries offices look like a strip mall from the 1980s. Everything about the place screamed modern efficiency. Open floor plans that actually promoted collaboration instead of just looking trendy, conference rooms with technology that had been invented sometime after the Bush administration, and a coffee machine that produced beverages you could drink without questioning your life choices. Lydia had introduced me to her brother Mason during my second visit. And let me tell you, the family resemblance was strong. Same sharp intelligence, same direct communication style, same complete lack of patience for corporate. Mason ran the financial side of Wilks Global with the kind of precision that made Jim's shoot from the hip management style look like what it was, outdated and ineffective. Marcus Mason had said during our first real strategy session, "We've been watching Tanner Industries for years, and honestly, we've been waiting for them to implode. The only thing that's kept them competitive is you, me, not the Tanner family legacy, not Jim's visionary leadership, not Brendan and Oliver's Harvard MBAs that their trust funds had basically purchased. Just me doing the actual work while everyone else took credit for it. We think there's a window here," Lydia had added, spreading out market analysis reports across the conference table like she was planning a military campaign. Tanner Industries has been coasting on established relationships for years, but those relationships are starting to fray. Clients are getting frustrated with slow response times and outdated systems. Suppliers are tired of dealing with bureaucratic approval processes that take forever. She was right, and I had the inside information to prove it. Danny Morrison at Morrison Logistics had been dropping hints for months about looking for alternative suppliers. Peterson Manufacturing was getting pissy about delivery delays that Brendan kept promising to fix, but never actually addressed. Even our longest-standing accounts were starting to ask pointed questions about whether Tanner Industries was still the right fit for their evolving needs. The thing is, Mason continued, we can't just waltz into their territory and expect to steal clients based on our good looks and winning personalities. We need someone who already has those relationships, someone clients trust and respect, someone who knows exactly where the weak spots are, After 15 years of watching Jim run Tanner Industries like his personal kingdom, I could write a dissertation on weak spots. Hell, I'd been mentally cataloging them for years, filing away every inefficiency and every missed opportunity like evidence in a case I didn't know I was building. The beautiful thing about the Wilks Global operation was how different it felt from every business meeting I'd ever attended at Tanner Industries. Instead of corporate theater and family politics, we talked about actual strategy, real numbers, realistic timelines, achievable goals that didn't require sacrificing quality or ethics to accomplish. It was like discovering that business meetings could actually be about business instead of ego management and succession planning. We're thinking aggressive but smart, Lydia explained during one particularly productive afternoon session. We don't want to just compete with Tanner Industries. We want to make them irrelevant, but we need to do it the right way with better service, better technology, and better relationships. Better relationships. That's where I came in. See, while Jim had been busy playing corporate royalty for the past 15 years, I'd been doing something revolutionary. I'd been treating suppliers like actual human beings instead of disposable vendors. Crazy concept, I know. Like Tommy Rodriguez at Midwest Distribution, who'd been dealing with Tanner Industries for 8 years and had never once spoken directly to Jim or either of his sons. But Tommy and we'd grab lunch every couple months, and I knew about his kids' soccer team and his wife's art gallery and his plan to expand his operation into Indiana. When I mentioned that Wilks Global was looking for reliable distribution partners in the region, Tommy's ears perked up like a golden retriever hearing a can opener. You know, Marcus, he'd said, leaning across the table at our usual diner. I've been thinking about diversifying our client base anyway. Tanner Industries is solid, but putting all our eggs in one basket makes me nervous. If Wilks Global is looking for partners instead of just vendors, that sounds like something worth exploring. Partners instead of vendors. The difference between those two words could make or break a business relationship, and Jim had never figured that out. To him, suppliers were interchangeable resources that existed to serve Tanner Industries' needs and should be grateful for the privilege. To me, they were collaborators who could make or break our success if treated with basic respect and professionalism. Within 2 weeks, I had preliminary agreements with 3 major suppliers who were ready to jump ship the moment Wilks Global officially entered the market. Not contracts. I wasn't stupid enough to put anything in writing while I was still technically employed by the competition, but conversations, handshake agreements, verbal commitments from people who trusted Marcus Sullivan more than they trusted the Tanner Industries corporate structure. The client side was even easier. Turns out that when you spend 15 years actually solving people's problems instead of just taking orders from the corner office, those people remember who was really taking care of them. Sarah Kim at Industrial Solutions Group had been dealing with delivery delays for months because Oliver kept promising improvements that never materialized. When I casually mentioned that I might be exploring new opportunities with a company that prioritized customer service, she practically begged for details. Marcus, you've been the only reason we've stuck with Tanner Industries this long, she'd said during what was supposed to be a routine quarterly review. If you were working somewhere else, somewhere that actually gave you the authority to fix problems instead of just apologizing for them, we'd follow you in a heartbeat. Music to my ears. 15 years of being treated like an interchangeable cog in Jim's machine, and it turned out that the client saw me as the face of the company's competence. Who would have thought? The hardest part was maintaining my cover at home. Claire had started noticing my late nights, but her definition of curiosity was about as deep as a puddle after a light drizzle. When she asked where I'd been, I'd tell her the truth. Company business. She just assumed I meant her father's company, which technically I did, just not in the way she was thinking. You've been working so hard lately, she'd say, not looking up from whatever reality show was rotting her brain that particular evening. Dad must really be keeping you busy. If only she knew that her precious daddy was about to find out exactly how busy I'd been, just not on his behalf. But Claire lived in a world where Daddy always knew best and Marcus always did what he was told. So the possibility that I might be planning my own future instead of just accepting whatever Jim decided it should be probably never crossed her mind. The funniest part was watching Jim's reaction to my sudden compliance. For weeks, I'd been the model employee, showing up early, staying late, attending every meeting I was invited to, laughing at his jokes, and nodding along with his strategic vision like it was handed down from Mount C. He was so pleased with himself for putting me in my place, that he actually started treating me better, like a pet that had finally learned to heel. You see, Marcus, he'd said after one particularly productive board meeting where I presented quarterly numbers without a single complaint about budget cuts or resource limitations. This is what happens when everyone knows their role and focuses on doing their best work. Maybe this salary adjustment was exactly what you needed to reach your full potential. My full potential, right? If Jim only knew that my full potential involved dismantling his business model piece by piece while he patted himself on the back for being such an effective leader. Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. "How are you feeling about January?" "Still on track." I typed back, "More than ready. Everything's falling into place." And it was suppliers lined up, clients ready to follow, employees who'd jump at the chance to work for a company that actually valued their contributions. Jim Tanner thought he'd broken me with his little power play. Thought he'd reminded me who was really in charge. What he'd actually done was give me the motivation to show him what real leadership looked like. The Midwest Industrial Supply Conference happens every November in Chicago, and it's basically the Super Bowl for guys like us who get excited about logistics optimization and supply chain management. 3 days of seminars, networking events, and vendor showcases where everyone pretends to care about innovative solutions while really just trying to figure out who's sleeping with whom and which companies are about to go belly up. This year's theme was adapting to tomorrow's challenges, which was corporate speak for how do we make more money while spending less on everything. Jim had been looking forward to this conference for months, partly because he loved playing big shot in front of his industry peers and partly because Tanner Industries was one of the keynote sponsors. Nothing strokes a CEO's ego quite like having your company logo plastered all over convention center banners while you deliver profound insights about market leadership to a captive audience of potential clients and competitors. I'd attended this same conference for the past 8 years, usually as Jim's wingman, the loyal lieutenant who'd smile and nod while he took credit for operational improvements I'd actually implemented. This year was going to be different though. This year I was attending as myself. Marcus Sullivan, soon to be Director of Strategic Expansion for Wilks Global, though Jim didn't know that part yet. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Lydia and Mason had secured a last-minute sponsor slot after another company pulled out due to budget constraints. Wilks Global would be announcing their Midwest expansion during the second day's keynote session right after Jim finished his presentation about maintaining market leadership through traditional values. The timing wasn't accidental. Lydia had a flair for dramatic irony that I was really starting to appreciate. Wednesday morning, I sat in the audience watching Jim strut onto the stage like a peacock who just discovered mirrors. He was wearing his best power suit, the one that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. And he had that confident swagger that comes from years of being told you're a business genius by people who depend on your approval for their paychecks. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jim began, his voice booming through the conference center sound system. "I want to talk to you today about what it really means to build a lasting business in this industry." Oh, this was going to be good. I settled back in my seat, pulled out my phone, and started recording. Not for any malicious purpose, you understand? Just for posterity. Sometimes you want to remember the exact moment when someone's hubris reaches peak altitude right before it comes crashing down to earth. Jim launched into his usual spiel about family values, time-tested principles, and the importance of staying true to your roots while lesser companies chased after flash-in-the-pan trends. He talked about Tanner Industries like it was some kind of industrial supply monastery where ancient wisdom was preserved and passed down through generations of enlightened leadership. "We don't follow market fads," he declared, clicking through slides that showed the company's steady growth over the past decade. "We set the standard that others try to follow. While our competitors are busy reinventing themselves every few years, we focus on what really matters. Consistent service, reliable partnerships, and the kind of personal relationships that can't be replicated by corporate algorithms." Consistent service, reliable partnerships, personal relationships. I had to give him credit. The man could spin a narrative like a political campaign manager. He was basically taking credit for everything I'd been doing for the past 15 years while making it sound like it was all part of his master plan. The audience was eating it up, too. Heads nodding, scattered applause at all the right moments. That kind of polite enthusiasm that conference attendees perfect after years of sitting through presentations that range from mildly interesting to actively painful. Jim was in his element. The successful CEO sharing hard-won wisdom with the next generation of industry leaders. In conclusion, he said, building toward what I knew would be his trademark closing line. Success in this business isn't about chasing every new opportunity that comes along. It's about building something solid, something lasting, something that will still be here when all the flash and glamour fades away. Tanner Industries has been that kind of company for 30 years and will be that kind of company for 30 more. The applause was enthusiastic, the kind of response that makes conference organizers happy and keynote speakers feel like they've just delivered the Gettysburg Address. Jim soaked it up like a sponge, probably already planning how he'd describe this triumph to Claire over dinner. The whole industry was hanging on my every word, he'd say, standing ovation when I finished. Then the conference moderator stepped up to the microphone. Thank you, Mr. Tanner, for those inspiring words about traditional business values. And now we're pleased to welcome Lydia Wilks, Chief Operating Officer of Wilks Global, who'll be sharing some exciting news about expansion and innovation in our industry. I watched Jim's face change as Lydia walked onto the stage. The confident smile faltered just slightly. Not enough for most people to notice. But I've been studying his expressions for 15 years. He knew Wilks Global was his biggest competition, but he'd assumed they'd stay safely contained on the West Coast where they belonged. The fact that Lydia was here at his conference giving a presentation to his audience was like finding out your ex-girlfriend was dating your boss. Lydia looked incredible up there. All confidence and professional authority in a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than Jim, but somehow managed to look effortless instead of showy. She had that California executive energy, polished but not pretentious, successful without being arrogant about it. Thank you all for being here today, she began, her voice carrying easily through the conference center. I want to talk to you about something that's been on my mind lately. The difference between maintaining the status quo and actually leading industry change. Maintaining the status quo. I almost laughed out loud. She was basically taking everything Jim had just said about traditional values and stability and turning it into an argument for why those things were actually weaknesses in a changing market. Brilliant. At Wilks Global, we believe that respecting the past doesn't mean being afraid of the future, Lydia continued. Which is why I'm excited to announce our expansion into the Midwest market, bringing innovative solutions and fresh perspectives to a region that's been underserved by companies stuck in yesterday's business models. I could practically feel the tension in the room ratcheting up a notch. This wasn't just a presentation anymore. This was a declaration of war delivered with PowerPoint slides and a smile that could cut glass. Jim was sitting 3 rows ahead of me and I could see his shoulders getting rigid as Lydia laid out Wilks Global's expansion plans with the kind of detail that suggested they'd been working on this for months now. Successful expansion isn't just about having a good business plan, Lydia said, advancing to her next slide. It's about having the right leadership team, people who understand the market, who have established relationships, and who share our vision for what this industry could become with the right kind of innovative thinking. This was it, my cue. I felt my heart rate spike as Lydia's eyes found mine in the audience. Which is why I'm thrilled to introduce you to our new Director of Strategic Expansion, someone you already know and respect for his contributions to this industry over the past 15 years. The room went dead silent as she gestured toward me. Please join me in welcoming Marcus Sullivan to the Wilks Global team. I stood up and I swear to God, you could have heard a pin drop in that conference center. 500 industry professionals, including every major player in the regional market, watching as I walked down the aisle toward the stage like I was heading to my own wedding. Except this time, I was marrying a company that actually wanted me instead of just tolerating my presence. The walk to the stage felt like it took forever and no time at all. I could see faces in the audience. Surprise, confusion, some knowing smiles from people who'd apparently seen this coming. Danny Morrison looked like someone had just told him Christmas was being moved to July. Sandra Chun from my old department was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. And Jim looked like someone had just told him his house was on fire and his insurance had expired yesterday. I shook Lydia's hand on stage, the cameras flashing like we were signing a peace treaty instead of launching what amounted to a business war. The handshake lasted just long enough for me to catch Jim's eye in the audience. Just long enough to mouth 2 words that I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Perfect timing. His face went through about 6 different shades of red before settling on a color that I can only describe as a stroke victim purple. Brendan and Oliver were sitting next to him, looking like someone had just explained quantum physics using interpretive dance. The whole Tanner Industries delegation looked like they'd been hit by a truck that they never saw coming. But the best part wasn't Jim's expression or the gas from the audience or even the scattered applause from people who were probably just happy to witness some genuine conference drama. The best part was the feeling of finally being introduced as myself instead of as someone's son-in-law or employee or lucky bastard who'd married above his station. Marcus brings 15 years of operational excellence and industry relationships to our expansion team. Lydia announced to the crowd, his track record speaks for itself, and we're confident that his leadership will make our Midwest operations a success from day one. His leadership, his track record, his success. After 15 years of having my achievements attributed to Jim's guidance and my failures blamed on my limitations, hearing someone acknowledge my actual contributions felt like winning the professional lottery. I stepped up to the microphone, looked out at an audience that included every major player in the regional industrial supply market, and smiled. Thank you, Lydia. I'm excited to be part of a team that values innovation and results over tradition for tradition's sake. Wilks Global represents everything I believe this industry can become when we stop limiting ourselves to what we've always done and start focusing on what we could accomplish. The applause was genuine this time, and I could see people in the audience already pulling out their phones to text colleagues who weren't at the conference. By tomorrow morning, every supplier, client, and competitor in the Midwest would know that Marcus Sullivan had just declared independence from the Tanner Industries empire. As I walked off the stage, I caught sight of Jim again. He was still sitting in his seat, but his confident posture had completely collapsed. The man who'd spent the morning talking about market leadership and lasting success looked like someone who just realized his empire wasn't as solid as he'd thought. Perfect timing indeed. Ever watched a controlled demolition? You know, where they place charges at just the right structural points and then hit the button to watch a whole building come down in about 15 seconds. That's basically what happened to Tanner Industries over the next 6 weeks. Except instead of explosives, I'd used 15 years of inside knowledge and a carefully cultivated network of people who were tired of Jim's. The first domino fell exactly 3 days after the conference. Danny Morrison called me on my new Wilks Global number. Yeah, I had a company phone now with my own voicemail message and everything to confirm the contract terms we discussed. Morrison Logistics was officially jumping ship, taking their $2.3 million annual account with them. That might not sound like empire-toppling money, but in the industrial supply business, losing a major client is like getting a public vote of no confidence from people who actually understand your operation. Marcus, Danny said, and I could practically hear him grinning through the phone. I've got to tell you, working with Wilks Global feels like stepping into the 21st century. You guys actually answer emails within the same business day. Revolutionary concept within the same business day. At Tanner Industries, responding to client emails was apparently considered a luxury service that required committee approval and a cost-benefit analysis. But at Wilks Global, we had this crazy policy called basic professional courtesy that seemed to really impress people. The second domino was Peterson Manufacturing. And that one was particularly satisfying because Oliver had been promising them improved delivery schedules for literally 8 months. 8 months of we're working on it. And these things take time, and you have to understand our operational constraints. When I called Peterson's purchasing director from my new office to introduce myself as their new Wilks Global contact, the guy practically wept with relief. Marcus, thank God, he said. We were about to start looking for alternative suppliers anyway. Oliver Tanner couldn't organize a 2-car parade, let alone fix our delivery issues. Peterson Manufacturing, $1.8 million annually, gone. 2 major clients down. And Jim was probably just starting to realize that his perfect timing salary cut had some unintended consequences. But the real bloodletting started when word spread through the supplier network. Tommy Rodriguez at Midwest Distribution was the first to officially switch sides. And once he started talking to his buddies about how much better Wilks Global was to work with, it was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Suppliers who'd been grumbling about Tanner Industries' payment delays and bureaucratic approval processes suddenly had a viable alternative that treated them like actual business partners instead of disposable vendors. Within 2 weeks, Tanner Industries was dealing with what Jim's emergency board meeting minutes probably described as supply chain disruptions due to external market factors. In reality, their suppliers were either jumping ship entirely or suddenly developing mysterious delays in fulfilling Tanner Industries' orders. Funny how that works when you spend years treating people like crap and then they find somewhere better to take their business. The employee exodus was even more entertaining to watch from the outside. Sandra Chun was the first to go, and let me tell you, losing her was like losing the engine that kept the whole operation running. Sandra knew every aspect of Tanner Industries' distribution network, from warehouse layout optimization to delivery route efficiency. When she gave her 2 weeks' notice, Jim tried to counteroffer with a promotion and a raise, but it was too little too late. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Tanner, Sandra had told him during what I heard was a supremely awkward exit interview. But I've accepted a position with a company that values innovation over tradition. Sometimes you have to take risks to grow professionally. Sandra joined Wilks Global as our operations coordinator, bringing with her a complete understanding of how to improve on everything Tanner Industries was doing wrong. It was like having a detailed blueprint of your competitors' weaknesses delivered directly to your planning committee. She wasn't the only one. Mike Chun from accounting, no relation to Sandra, despite the name, followed her out the door after 12 years with the company. Then Jennifer Walsh from Client Services, who'd been dealing with Oliver's incompetent management style for way too long. By the end of November, Tanner Industries had lost 6 key employees, and the remaining staff was starting to look around like passengers on the Titanic, who just heard the word iceberg. The best part was watching Brendan and Oliver try to manage the crisis. These two geniuses who'd never had to actually solve a business problem that couldn't be fixed with daddy's money or connections were suddenly responsible for keeping operations running while their most experienced people headed for the exits. It was like watching teenagers try to perform brain surgery with tools they'd never seen before. During one particularly disastrous week, Oliver managed to lose a major shipment because he'd forgotten to coordinate with the trucking company about holiday scheduling. The client, Industrial Solutions Group, Sarah Kim's company, called to complain. And Oliver's brilliant solution was to blame the trucking company for not anticipating our needs, despite the fact that nobody had bothered to tell them about the shipment in the first place. Sarah called me that same afternoon, officially requesting to transfer her account to Wilks Global. "Marcus, I can't do business with amateurs," she said, and she sounded genuinely frustrated. Oliver Tanner just tried to explain to me how the trucking industry works despite the fact that I've been managing logistics for 15 years. The kid is clueless. Sarah's account $3.2 million annually. Another major client down, and we weren't even trying that hard. They were basically driving customers away with their own incompetence. Meanwhile, the local business press was starting to notice the pattern. The Chicago Business Journal ran a story titled "Regional Supply Chain Shakeup as Established Players Face New Competition." The article didn't mention names, but anyone in the industry could read between the lines. Tanner Industries was bleeding clients and employees while Wilks Global was aggressively expanding into their territory. By December, Jim had gone from confident industry leader to desperate damage control mode. He started calling emergency board meetings every other day trying to figure out how to stop the hemorrhaging. The company's credit rating got downgraded after suppliers started demanding faster payment terms, which created a cash flow problem that made it even harder to compete on pricing. Claire finally noticed something was wrong when Jim started showing up at our house for family dinners that were really strategy sessions disguised as pot roast and small talk. She'd sit there looking concerned while her father ranted about disloyal employees and predatory competitors who were trying to destroy everything he'd built. "I don't understand what's happening," she said to me one night after Jim had left following a particularly intense discussion about market pressures and competitive threats. "Dad's company has always been so stable. Why is everything falling apart now? Everything falling apart now." Sweet, naive Claire, who'd lived her entire life believing that Daddy's success was some kind of natural law that couldn't be challenged by mere mortals with better ideas and superior execution. The possibility that her father's empire might have some structural weaknesses had apparently never crossed her mind. "Market conditions change," I told her, which was technically true. "Sometimes companies that don't adapt get left behind." "But you work there," she said, like she was just remembering that her husband was employed by the company that was currently circling the drain. "Shouldn't you be helping Dad figure out how to fix this? Shouldn't I be helping Dad fix this? Right? Because clearly my job as the loyal son-in-law was to sacrifice my own professional future to prop up Jim's ego and incompetent management style. The fact that I might have my own career goals and ambitions was apparently beside the point. "Claire," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Your father made his position very clear when he cut my salary and excluded me from strategic planning meetings. He doesn't want my help. He wants my compliance." She stared at me like I just suggested we sell the house and join the circus. "Marcus, you're being ridiculous. Dad values your input. He's just under a lot of pressure right now. Values my input." Sure he did. Which was why I'd been systematically excluded from every important decision for the past 2 months while watching his golden boys run the company into the ground with their Ivy League business degrees and complete lack of real-world experience. The phone rang that night at 11:30, which was never a good sign. It was Jim, and he sounded like a man who just realized his house was on fire and the fire department was busy washing their trucks. "Marcus," he said, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. "We need to talk first thing tomorrow morning." "Sure thing, Jim. Everything okay?" There was a pause long enough for me to imagine him sitting in his home office staring at quarterly reports that probably looked like a crime scene. "We'll discuss it tomorrow. Just be there early." I hung up and smiled in the darkness of my bedroom. Jim Tanner, the man who'd spent 30 years telling everyone else how to run their businesses, was about to ask for help from the charity case he'd been trying to crush just 2 months earlier. This was going to be fun. 6 months later, I was standing in the main floor of Wilks Global's brand new Midwest distribution center, watching a team twice the size of my old crew at Tanner Industries move inventory with the kind of efficiency that would have made Jim's head explode. State-of-the-art tracking systems, automated sorting equipment, and employees who actually gave a damn about their jobs because they worked for a company that treated them like valuable assets instead of disposable resources. The irony wasn't lost on me. This facility was everything I tried to convince Jim we needed at Tanner Industries. Modern, efficient, strategically located for optimal distribution coverage. I'd pitched similar upgrades to him at least a dozen times over the years only to be told that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we've always done fine with our current systems. Well, congratulations, Jim. Your refusal to invest in the future had just handed your biggest competitor the blueprint for destroying your market share. Lydia found me by the main sorting station where our new automated system was processing orders at about 3 times the speed of Tanner Industries' manual operation. She was holding a leather portfolio that looked expensive enough to feed a small family for a month, which probably meant good news for yours truly, Marcus, she said, and her smile had that satisfied quality that comes from watching a plan come together perfectly. I've got something for you. She handed me the portfolio, and inside was a contract extension that made my original Wilks Global offer look like pocket change. Director of Strategic Expansion was apparently just the entry-level position. The new title was Vice President of Regional Operations with an equity stake that would make me a legitimate millionaire if the company's expansion continued at its current pace. You've more than proven yourself, Lydia continued as I tried not to let my jaw hit the floor while reading the compensation details. The Midwest expansion has exceeded every projection we made. We're 3 months ahead of schedule and already profitable. That doesn't happen by accident. No, it doesn't happen by accident. It happens when you hire people who actually know what they're doing instead of people who happen to share your DNA. Novel concept. Apparently, the numbers were impressive enough to make even my accountant do a happy dance. We'd captured 60% of Tanner Industries' major accounts within 4 months. Hired away their best employees and established supply relationships that were going to be nearly impossible for them to compete with. When you treat suppliers like partners instead of peasants, funny thing, they remember that when it's time to choose sides. There's more, Lydia said, because apparently my day needed to get even better. Mason and I have been talking and we want to offer you something that goes beyond this regional expansion. She pulled out another folder and this one contained organizational charts for Wilks Global's entire operation. We're planning a national expansion over the next 2 years. Full coverage coast to coast taking on the big players in every major market. We want you to head up the whole operation. Head up the whole operation. As in, be the guy making strategic decisions for a company that was about to become a major player in the national industrial supply market. As in, stop being someone's employee and start being someone's business partner with real authority and real rewards. I looked around the distribution center again, watching people who used to work for Tanner Industries doing their jobs with the kind of enthusiasm that comes from being treated with respect and given room to excel. Sandra Chun was training new hires on inventory management. Mike from accounting was implementing cost tracking systems that actually made sense. Jennifer Walsh was building client relationships that would last for years instead of just hoping clients wouldn't notice how screwed up everything was behind the scenes. What do you think? Lydia asked. Ready to take on the big leagues? What did I think? I thought about Jim Tanner sitting in his oversized office, probably staring at quarterly reports that looked like a medical examiner's findings. I thought about Brendan and Oliver trying to explain to their board of directors how they'd managed to lose half their client base to a competitor they'd never taken seriously. I thought about Claire, who'd filed for divorce 3 months ago when she'd finally realized that being married to me wasn't quite as advantageous as it used to be. The divorce had been predictably ugly with Claire's lawyers trying to argue that my Wilks Global position was somehow community property that she deserved to benefit from. Apparently, even after our marriage imploded, she still thought she was entitled to profit from my professional success. The judge had been less impressed with that argument than she'd hoped. You know what, Lydia? I said, closing the contract folder and extending my hand for a handshake that would officially make me a vice president at one of the fastest growing companies in the industry. I think I'm ready. The local business press had been having a field day with the whole situation. The rise and fall of Tanner Industries, a case study in family business succession, had been the headline in last month's Regional Commerce Review. The article quoted industry insiders who blamed the company's decline on outdated management practices and failure to retain key talent. Key talent? That would be me, folks. The charity case, who apparently wasn't executive material, had just been promoted to run national operations for a company that was kicking his former employer's ass up and down the supply chain. The best part wasn't even the professional vindication or the money or the equity stake that was going to make me genuinely wealthy instead of just well compensated. The best part was walking into industry conferences now and having people treat me like Marcus Sullivan, successful executive instead of Marcus Sullivan, Jim Tanner's son-in-law who'd gotten lucky. Jim tried calling me exactly once about 2 months after the conference disaster. I let it go to voicemail and his message was a masterpiece of desperate corporate speak. Marcus, I think there may have been some misunderstandings about your role at Tanner Industries. Perhaps we could sit down and discuss how to move forward in a way that benefits everyone involved. Misunderstandings about my role benefits everyone involved. The man who'd publicly declared that I wasn't executive material was suddenly interested in revisiting our professional relationship now that his company was hemorrhaging money and reputation. I deleted the message without calling him back. Some bridges are meant to be burned, and watching them burn from a safe distance while sipping expensive whiskey is one of life's genuine pleasures. Trade journals started calling me the man who dethroned Tanner, which was probably giving me more credit than I deserved, but sounded pretty badass on business cards. The truth was simpler. I just stopped accepting a situation that was beneath my worth and started working for people who recognized what I brought to the table. 6 months ago, I was the grateful son-in-law who should have been thankful for whatever scraps Jim decided to throw my way. Now I was the vice president of a company that was rewriting the rules for how business gets done in this industry, with an equity stake that would set me up for life and the professional respect that I'd been earning for 15 years but never receiving. Standing in that distribution center watching efficiency and professionalism in action, I couldn't help but think about Jim's words from our last conversation. Perfect timing. He'd been right about that, just not in the way he'd intended. Jim Tanner had wanted to cut my salary in half and remind me of my place in his family hierarchy. Instead, he'd cut himself out of his own empire and handed me the keys to build something better. I wasn't just surviving the corporate politics and family drama anymore. I was writing the next chapter of my own success story, and it felt pretty damn good to be holding the pen for once.